Welcome back. We're now on part 2 of our Understanding Self-Defense Techniques video series. In part 1, I shared with you the 2 core pillars that all martial arts systems are built upon. Pillar 1, the basics, and Pillar 2, of course, the concepts. We also looked at how you'll get more out of your self-defense techniques if you utilize them as a vehicle through which you can extract the concepts. And I shared with you a concept or a model from Kempo that can allow you to do just that. It's called the 3-phase concept. And we looked at a couple of our very basic self-defense techniques, delayed sword and sword of destruction. And we looked at them from phase 1, the ideal phase. And we pulled a couple of lessons out of the technique to get you started. Now I hope, since we left you in part 1, that you've taken the techniques, you've been exploring them a little on your own, and you may well be on your way to phase 2 already and asking some what-if questions. So why don't we get started looking at a couple places that you can go to find the answers. Now the first place I recommend you look, and this is oftentimes a place that's overlooked, that's within the technique itself. Because well-designed, well-constructed techniques oftentimes have backups that are in place to deal with various contingencies. And if you start here, you may just find the answer you're looking for. It's not that you can't find the answer elsewhere, but by starting here, you may develop a greater appreciation for the capabilities of the technique. Now, that's not always the case. You're not always going to find the answer within the technique as written. You may have to reformulate it, which we're not going to get into in this series. So let's give you another place that you can look to find the answers. The second place I recommend is to look within another technique. And that's exactly why we gave you a couple of techniques. Delayed sword, sword of destruction are 2 techniques that work very well together. See, oftentimes you'll find that certain techniques serve as backups for one another. And you want to explore the relationships that exist between your techniques. So these are the 2 places I'd recommend you look to get started. Later on, we're going to have a course that we're going to be releasing which will allow you to reformulate your techniques. We're going to go through the formulation process piece by piece, and it's a very versatile, very powerful process. But to get started today, we're just going to look at these 2 places, and I have Moses here to help out. So why don't we take a look at delayed sword and sword of destruction, and we'll show you how this works in action. So we'll get started. We'll review delayed sword. As you recall, this is a single hand lapel grab. Now I'm pin checking. I'm going to stretch him out and pull him off balance to negate his ability to throw a kick. I'm pulling this shoulder towards me, which should help negate his ability to throw a punch. And then we check, strike the arm, kick, and chop. But what if, because he is trying to punch me, what if that hand comes around too quick? Well, we have our chamber, don't we? And in this case, it serves as a block. Then I segue back into the technique, strike the arm, and kick and chop, etc. So that's one instance in which you'll find that the technique itself can serve very nicely as the solution to the question that you're asking. Let's take it a step further. What if that hand doesn't come around as quick? I stretch him off balance. Maybe that does help negate him for an instance. But I strike his arm. Now that hand comes around, and look at what we segue into. Sword of destruction. So here, sword of destruction serves as a backup for delayed sword. Let's change sides. I'm sure you've already guessed that this can work in reverse. He throws a roundhouse punch. Now, he's not just throwing one punch. We know he's throwing one punch followed by another. And I can segue into delayed sword as a backup for sword of destruction. Not only that, you'll notice here I've adapted delayed sword, which we taught you as a grab defense, into a punch defense. And that's a concept that we're going to be exploring in part 3, which is a major lesson, how you can adapt the lessons and the movements that you're learning to multiple situations. And this works in reverse as well. He can start with a punch, and I can segue from one to the other off of 2 punches, starting with delayed sword and progressing into sword of destruction again. Now, what about the role in this whole process of analyzing your techniques, asking questions and looking for the answers? What about the role that your viewpoint plays? See, your point of view is very powerful, so I want to explore that a little bit now and share with you one last concept to close out this part of the series. And this is called the 3 viewpoints. This is another concept from Kempo, and I'll tell you, I was personally reminded of the role that your viewpoint plays, how critical a role it can play A couple summers ago, I was on a hike with a buddy of mine. We went up a trail, and on the way back down, we were questioning. We weren't sure if we were on the same trail. Now, of course, we were, but it just goes to show you that from a different perspective, things can look incredibly different. So if you explore your different viewpoints, your different perspectives, you never know when you're going to see something different. And that seeing things in a new way may be just what you need to take your understanding to a whole new level. So that's what we're talking about here. Now we have the 3 viewpoints. And the first viewpoint is one we're more than familiar with. We learn a technique and we're practicing on a partner. And if we're the ones performing the technique, we're looking at it from our perspective. So from your perspective or first person perspective, whatever you want to call it. You're the one doing the technique. And you need to explore it from that point of view to really get an understanding. But oftentimes people get stuck in this point of view. Now before we move on to the next perspective, I do want to give you one really critical tip to help you get the most out of this particular viewpoint. Train with multiple partners. Don't find yourself getting stuck training with the same partner time after time, because things look different on different opponents, different size opponents, different body types. And certain movements aren't designed for certain types of opponents. And being sure to switch up your opponent will help to remind you of that very important lesson, so you don't find yourself stuck when you're first trying to utilize one of your lessons in a self-defense situation. You find out it doesn't work. So change up your partners and change them up often. Now, not only that, when you're training with a partner, we're paying attention, they're punching in at us and we're paying attention. But what about when we punch in for them? That's the second viewpoint. So explore your opponent's point of view, because you're going to see things differently. You're going to see openings and weaknesses that the technique presents from a whole new light. And as you explore things from this viewpoint, you might become aware that some of your techniques have weaknesses that they're just not worth it, and you should toss them away. On the other hand, there's always weaknesses that present themselves in different techniques, and this is a great way to make yourself aware of them so that you're ready. So use this viewpoint. Explore your opponent's perspective. It's a perspective we take often, but more often than not, we're not paying attention as our opponent's doing the technique on us. We're just standing there and waiting our turn so that we can then do the technique again on our opponent. So practice the techniques, explore your perspective, explore it from multiple points of view, meaning work with multiple training partners, and explore your opponent's perspective. There's one last viewpoint I'm going to share with you, but it's really much more than that. This is the viewpoint you've taken in this series. It's the bystander perspective, we call it. It's the perspective where you're outside looking in. And this is a powerful perspective as well. Don't find yourself looking at the technique from one angle though. Move around, change angles. Look at the technique from overhead. Try different angles, because again, the whole idea of these viewpoints, you never know what point of view is going to allow you to see something that you hadn't seen before. And so it's a very powerful concept. What I want you to do though is, now we've talked about it. This is a simple idea and it's one that we're probably already familiar with, but now make sure you apply it. Take this idea and apply it as you explore the technique from the ideal phase. Apply it as you're starting to devise what-if questions, and apply it again as you're looking for the answers to the questions. So use your viewpoints in conjunction with the 3-phase concept. I do have 2 additional techniques I want to share with you now, and these are 2 techniques that also have connections and can serve as a backup for one another. But I also want you to pay attention to the connections that are contained within all 4 techniques that we will have given you thus far in the series. We have Moses, who's still here, so let's rejoin him. And let's look at a combination. In Kempo, this is 2 combination. This is a non-traditional version of the technique that we teach to our students. So it's a roundhouse punch defense, and as he steps in, you're going to notice I'm going to perform an outward block with my left hand, an inward block with my right hand. We call it a double hammer block. My left hand is actually serving as a check, while my right hand is designed to strike and inflict injury and try to cripple this arm and break his height a little and pull him into my back fist, which is my next move. The left hand's a check, because if I just strike the biceps, he could wrap around and catch me in the face. So we want insurance in place. So again, he throws his punch, I block, back fist, and then push drag in with a collapsing elbow strike to the solar plexus. It's a pretty straightforward technique. Throw your punch again. We'll do it slow. 1, 2, 3. So there's your first technique. Let's change sides now. In 2 combination, we have an inward block followed by an outward strike and then an elbow strike to the solar plexus. We're going to look at now shielding hammer, which you'll see has an outward block followed by an inward strike. This is going to be a raking hammer across the face and then a collapsing elbow strike to the solar plexus. So he throws his punch, I block, strike, and then elbow strike as I push drag in. Now let's explore some what-if questions. The first question, well, he throws his first punch. We know that he's not just going to throw one punch. What if that hand's coming around? What if as I start to do my hammer strike, this hand's already on orbit, coming around, trying to catch me in the face? Well, if we follow the technique as written and we're quick enough, I can follow around and I can strike the face and block and elbow strike. So he throws his first punch. We have 1, 2, 3. This of course is going to be a quick 1, and it just comes right back across. We've turned our offense and our defense into one move, and then we finish again with our elbow. But we might not be quick enough. So what if we're not? Well, of course, we can now segue into 2 combination. We see 2 combination can serve as a backup for shielding hammer, and the reverse can be true as well. So continue to further explore these techniques, ask some additional what-if questions, and make sure you use your 3 viewpoints as you go through this whole process. That'll be it for this part of the series. In our next part, in our final part of our 3-part video series, we're going to explore a concept called the master key concept. We're going to look at how you can take what you're learning from your techniques and apply what you've learned to multiple situations. It's a pretty important and critical concept to this whole process of utilizing your self-defense techniques as a vehicle for the concepts. As you extract the concepts, we want to see how many different situations we can apply them to. So stay tuned for part 3. For now, go to work on exploring all 4 of the techniques we've shared with you and try to understand the relationship that exists between all 4 techniques. Hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you soon with part 3.